Hello. Good afternoon, folks. I'd like to call the Finance Audit Tendering and Administration Committee meeting February 28th, 3:30. Call to order. Order of business. Number two, got the approval of the agenda. Have a motion for approval of the agenda. Thank you, Councillor Drong. Moved Councillor Drong, seconded by Mayor Brown. Declarations, number three, declarations of conflict of interest. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest, Board? No, thank you. Adoption of the minutes, January 17, 2023, which are attached in your packages. Is any questions on those minutes that anyone has an issue with?
I'll approve them, but there is business arising from the adoption of the minutes, so I'll approve the minutes.
Okay. Councillor or Mayor Brown approved the minutes, seconded by Councillor Zhang. And did you have a question on the minutes, Mayor Brown?
Page 20 of our document from January 17th, we had 8 months ending November 30th. On our financial statements, we plan to get an update for end of December, end of January? That's what I'm asking.
I'll turn that over to Betty, the Finance Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through the chair to your worship. At our next regularly scheduled Finance Committee meeting next week, we will have both December and January financial statements ready.
Yeah. Too soon to ask the end of February because of the shortness of the window between the end of the month and next week's meeting. Like, that'll be the 11 months of 12 months ending? Is that possible, or can we only go to the January 31st through the chair to manager?
Betty?
We could give you what we've processed so far for February, but a lot of, there's a month-end process that we go through that wouldn't be completed by that time. But we can give you what we have so far. So they could just be kind of preliminary financial statements, so we can do that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so item 6, discussions, reports. Just before I go into these, on 6A, update on the procurement bylaw, and 6B, update in the provincial funding discussion. I'd just like to make it clear, the staff are well aware of the urgency that I've expressed on this, and is certainly support for getting both these items updated as soon as we can. I know we're going to Dan Jenkins is going to speak to both here today, but it's certainly my intention going forward to these two items will remain on the Finance Committee agenda till we get them kind of dealt with and progress on them. And I just feel with certainly on the procurement bylaw, with going forward with the contracts and the issues that these tendering process can put upon council, that we do have to have, because these contracts in a lot of cases that can cause some issue when you talk about local and off-island and what have you. We have to, these contracts, they're not hundreds, thousands, in a lot of cases they're millions of dollars, so we do have to have this procurement bylaw done and finished as soon as we can, and looking forward to, Danny, what you can say here and a timeline on that. And as for the provincial funding discussion, I mean, that's another one. I know in talking with the staff and on this, there's collaborations and discussions going on. I mean, we're overdue, a year overdue on the on this particular piece, and I know there's some collaboration. There's other other municipalities dealing with the same thing, and there's a piece, I guess, that goes on with the discussions with the PI Federation of Municipalities. But when I look at what our financial needs are for the city, and listening to some of the discussions, and certainly I know with police and fire, and that there's some big asks and demands that are going to be on our budget. And I think what might be unprecedented with some of our budget and finances going forward, I know that it is budget time, and there's probably a lot of history here with more asks than there's dollars available for. But what's probably unprecedented for them, I think this procurement bylaw and funding thing is important, is that the unprecedented growth that we've had in the city and continue to have, we can't kick the can any longer on these items. So that's the end of my lecture. And Dan, if you could speak to 6A, update on the procurement bylaw, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Little history. So a draft procurement bylaw was prepared by finance staff over several years and was reviewed by myself in February of this year. A well-written procurement bylaw or policy is a cornerstone to obtain optimum value at the lowest cost based upon full life cycle costing of purchasing assets. And to get specific needs with appropriate levels of quality and service by enticing competitive suppliers to rely on a fair, equitable, open, and transparent process that encourages bidders to invest the time and resources necessary to respond to the opportunities to supply the city. The procurement bylaw or policy helps the city meet its legal obligations and ethical obligations in the acquisition of goods. Many of these contracts, as you mentioned, Chair, are in fact legal contracts of substantial value, and if mishandled, are exposing the city to substantial risk. So it has to be done right. Often procurement policies and bylaws are formed using precedents from other municipalities or public service bodies, as appears to be the case with this draft bylaw. The bylaw draft has been under construction for several years, as I mentioned, with work being done by several staff at different points in time. And in review, it seems apparent that several provisions of the precedent document may have been deleted or substantially revised over time. And some of the deficiencies noted in my review were adequate internal and purchase tracking controls are not required for purchases under $50,000, which is a very material amount. The draft doesn't clearly articulate necessary processes for managing lower value purchases that are now typically facilitated using purchase or credit cards, commonly referred to as P cards. Some modification will need to be made to accounting processes and accounting technologies currently in place, or Microsoft GP and eRequester, to make sure that the effective procedures and controls are in place to match the requirements of the new bylaw. They have to go hand in hand. Given my concern with the fractured nature of the draft noted, I've requested permission from another public sector body to use their more robust, modern, and effective procurement policies and procedures, either as a reliable foundation document to be tailored for use by the city, or to borrow specific provisions that we can plug the gaps in the existing proposed bylaw. An example would be the P card provisions. With the new bylaw and accompanying procedures, there will be a significant investment in training, retraining staff, both in finance and the operating departments. And it's important that this investment in time and energy is deployed on a complete and reliable policy and bylaw. We don't want to redo this with staff. The work on the review of the existing bylaw and revisions to plug some of those gaps will commence immediately after the 24-25 financial plan is adopted, hopefully in the next few weeks here. and should not take more than 6 months to complete, I would say, sooner if at all possible. It's a priority for me as the Director of Corporate Services, and I appreciate that it's a high priority item. But because it is, has implications, in terms of value, risk, and contract exposure, we have to make sure that it's right.
Thank you for that, that update, Dan. It probably gives a little more perhaps insight to, certainly to myself, I guess, in terms of the impact, that it has, and staff piece, training piece. I'll, another question to me, I'll just open it up to committee. Councillor Drong, you have your mic on.
Thank you, Chair McAleer, and thank you, Dan. I know a number of years ago I went to you in your former job, and I had concerns about the procurement bylaw. And as you stated here, it's a work in progress. You've seen some issues that need to be addressed. It's been 2 years now since staff have been working on this, and you say you can get it done in 6 months. When I went a couple of years ago and sat down with the government at that time with my concerns, it was stated that everything was fine, and then we get into the BDO, report and recommendations. So it's been here with questions for so long. So many staff have been working on it. And, there's been some BDO, when the report came out, recommendations, what we can do to improve this. Here I feel that it's costing the city money, it's costing the residents money, not to have this procurement bylaw in place. We've been sitting here for a year or more at this committee asking for it, and now we're looking at another 6 months or so. I think it's prudent for the city to get the resources to you, to your office, to Betty, to get this stuff tied up a lot quicker than 6 months. I know residents have come to me with questions and complaints and concerns and asking me to push this. So I thank the chair for leaving this on the agenda. And I ask once again to get this procurement bylaw in place before the 6 months. We need this, the city needs this, and I'm just asking, for if you need help or your office needs help, then there's something we have to do to get this in place quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Drong. Any other, Mayor Brown?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it actually goes back more than a year. The former council, we dealt with it. We actually brought in members from the provincial procurement department, Laurie Richard being one of them, to go over their provincial procurement act. And lots of similarities that we could use to help assist local suppliers, local contractors, and so forth. So it's more than a year. It's 2. It's going on 3 years. And 6 months, I think we just have to look at shortening in that time frame, because if you need more resources, I'm sure we'll find more resources. This keeps coming up every time we talk about a tender. And especially when we see tenders going off island, because remember, we only have one tax base, that's property taxes. So you have suppliers, you have contractors that have properties, pay property tax, contribute to the economy. So that has to be first and foremost. And I know there are trade deals with the Atlantic Procurement Agreement. There's also the NAFTA, which is now called, it's now more of a mutual agreement between the North America. We have that all in place, but we still have to look at protecting those suppliers, contractors that live, work, play, and raise families here. So I agree with Councillor Ron. We don't always agree with each other, but this I do because we have to move on it so that we can get something in place. Leaving it on the agenda. Look, it's been on the agenda for 2 years plus. It's so. Yeah, no, well, it's been in mind, but we just keep avoiding dealing with it. There is, as I said, the Provincial Procurement Act. There is the University of Prince Edward Island procurement policy that we can adapt and use for our own purposes. So, Dan, I appreciate that you've put it on within 6 months, but we have to fast track it so we can get it in place. Thank you. Just before I leave, Dan, I'm looking through my report. Did you incorporate your report that you gave us in the minutes or in our package?
I did not, Your Worship, sorry.
Can we get what you, I'm sure that you had a written copy. Can we have that sent to us?
Indeed, yep.
Thank you.
Okay, Dan, now, won't beat you up any more than that, but just question clarification. You said in your points, like the impacts and some of the steps, you talked about somewhat copying or policy and procedure of another organization. Could you just elaborate on that for me, please?
Yes, Chair. So one of the concerns that I had when I read the document was that because there were pieces missing, and the way I describe it is it's like a table. If you take a leg out, you don't know when somebody's going to lean on that corner of the table and it's going to fall over. So without that strong foundation to kind of make sure that the interrelated controls and policies and practices that support a strong procurement regime you don't know for sure they're there. So we just have to review it, make sure that all the critical components are there, add in the pieces that we've agreed on in terms of the sustainability piece, add in the P-card purchasing for small value items, make sure that we're covered on purchase orders, so it's not just for items above $50,000 value as a requirement. We've done some investigation already in terms of the manager of finance has looked into better integration between our GP, Microsoft GP, and the e-requester in terms of updating purchase order amounts. There was some inconsistent transfer data from one system to the other, but we do have provision, we understand now, to smooth that problem, and we'll have a consultant that'll, the supplier of the software, that'll fix that issue. In terms of additional resources, Councillor Duran through the chair, I appreciate the suggestion, and we'll discuss a little later. The Finance Department has put in a request for an extra $100,000 for a consultant to help with that process in terms of the bylaw review, reviewing policies and procedures, and helping with training. So, point well taken.
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up question.
Mayor Brown?
So it's been going on a year at this council, probably 2+. Is there any background information upstairs from the previous years that we brought it up? Like, we were being told that it was being looked, and have you discovered anything?
I'm sorry that what was being brought up.
So the last council, from 2018 to 2022, this issue was brought up by the former Finance Committee, Standing Committee for Finance Administration, and it was being dealt with. So is there any documented information that would lead us to believe that it was being looked into by former staff in finance and administration? Because that's who we were asking.
Yes, certainly there is evidence of previous work that's been done. In fact, I received just earlier this week a completely different draft of a procurement bylaw that was done by a different staff member and doesn't resemble the current bylaw to any reasonable extent. So, to my point about a number of different staff members being involved with this process over a period of time, and probably because of the turnover in staff, a lot of that work has not been productively harvested, if you will. So to my point, there have been a lot of cooks in the kitchen on this particular piece, but there has been work ongoing. I certainly have seen evidence of that in my 6 weeks.
Dan, just come back. Maybe I misunderstood. I thought in your remarks and points you had referenced. I know in talking with you personally, you mentioned UPEI procurement policy as as a bit of a I don't know an example or whatever. But wasn't there not an organization or some kind of template you were saying that
Yes, Chair, there are a number of entities that have, that would be comparable to the city, in the municipality, university, nonprofit sector, that would have similar needs in terms of procurement bylaw or policy. So there's lots of good precedents out there. The university was one that I had dealt with in my work there, and I have a relationship with the staff there, so I was able to reach out to them on short notice. There are others. Halifax has a very nice, robust procurement policy and a manual that goes step by step through the purchasing process from cradle to grave. So there are some really good resources that we could borrow with pride and get something implemented sooner than later. But we have to, we do have to dedicate additional resources because I'm just not comfortable bringing this bylaw to committee and council as it's now written. It would have been nice to just hand it off and say, off you go, Bob's your uncle, but my concern is that we would create more problems than we would solve by bringing this document forward.
And as chair, I'm certainly, I guess, appreciative, and you're saying, a little more time. I know you're saying, maybe 6 months, and I know Councillor Drong and Mayor are saying, something less. But if personally, if it's 6 months to get it right, so be it. But anyway, it's just my own personal view. And CAO Eleanor, you got your mic on?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. For me, this highlights a couple things. One, the fact that it's taken 2 years and we're still having this conversation speaks to some of the troubles that the department has had in terms of resourcing and changeover in how we can't get a consistent product out of there. I know Betty has worked very hard over the last year trying to pull something together, but when you're so low staff, you have a procurement bylaw on the side of your desk and a million other financial things that you need to be addressing at the same time. So what the director is putting forward here makes sense. We would want to make sure that we do have a proper scan of comparable municipalities across Canada. It takes into consideration new things like technology and AI and how that can tie into procurement processes. And the other thing that keeps tripping us up, we could rush and get a bylaw in front of you, but we may not have all the systems to support what that bylaw entails and what's required of it. So bringing someone in to be able to do this work and develop a more comprehensive system and product, I think is the better way to go here. And I know Dan's going to talk about that a bit in the budget process. Thanks.
Yeah, so just to clarify on this person, like it wouldn't necessarily be a long-term position, it would be kind of a one-off, is that correct?
Yes, the recommended new initiative is for a contract consultant to come in and help launch and train.
And don't mind, Betty, not to kind of put you on the spot, but I just I know you were dealing with this, and a year ago, over a year ago, you come into a bit of a bit of a firestorm, and I know you did your best to kind of respond to this as well. I just wondered if you had any comment on where we're trying to get with this, and if you do, great. If you don't, that's fine. Or as Dan said it all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Dan has said it all. We have done what we could with the resources we have, and starting with a policy that was done, our bylaw done a couple of years ago. I believe I was told it actually was approved by Finance Committee, it just never went to the next step. Then Sustainability added their pieces, and then Sabakun spent a lot of time on it, and then I spent a lot of time on it. And I think both Sabakun and I would have preferred to go Dan's approach and start with a better bylaw, but so much had been invested in this one, that's why we kept moving forward with that. So I do agree that this is the best way to go, is to start with a new template and somebody who can devote the time to it as opposed to doing it piecemeal here and there.
Thank you for that, Betty. Dan, did
And I just want to point out that there are some very valuable provisions in the draft bylaw that, you know, with respect to sustainability and some of our some of the BDO recommendations that we will be able to take and use, but we just need to make sure that the foundation is solid before we put a chocolate cake on a house of matches.
well, I'll close the discussion on the procurement bylaw, but I'd like to feel, I think we have, we've got all the staff and all the people in the room, with the exception of, the balance of council, but, it's pretty evident, the group here, the committee, we're not going to leave this, get the budget out of the way, and if we have to make resources available to get you what you need to get this thing done, we're going to do that, and that's going to be my advice and push, so thank you.
Mr. Chair, just before we close, so we got the background information for the last 2-3 years. Our manager of finance started to work on it, and now we're looking at a new template. Well, the template is pretty evident. We need a procurement bylaw. There's lots of examples out there. So, as the Irvings would say, just get it done. Like, we just have to get this done so that, it's a fair approach to our local suppliers, our local contractors, so that, we're giving back something that they give us in terms of property taxes and services to the community. So I know it's going to stay on the agenda, but let's just get it done. Thank you.
Is that the Irving thing, or is that the Nike swoosh? Get it done or something? Okay, Dan, can you give us what you can on the provincial, the funding discussion, please?
Certainly. So just a little bit of distant history, or ancient history almost. So the Memorandum of Understanding on Municipal Funding that was signed in 2017, which replaced the old CUSA and a grant system that existed before, was a 5-year agreement and expired in 2021. It was extended for a year, which brought it to, I think, March 31st, 2022, and was operating without a contract since that period. Negotiations have been underway with municipalities and the province since 2021. So this has been a slow process. The funding that is in place, although there isn't a contract to support the funding, specifically the tax credits and equalization and municipal capital expenditure grant, the province has taken the position that they will continue to extend that funding package until a new agreement has been reached, or at least for the current fiscal year, and I expect that we'll hear that it's been extended pending a new agreement. That being said, as I say, the negotiations have gone on. There has been little in terms of tangible negotiations, in terms of analyzing data, asks and responses. I think the lesson, or I guess my advice at this stage, is that the province will look for specific support for additional funding. I believe that they see the municipalities as partners as opposed to opposition on the funding discussion. So I think they want to understand that the services that are needed by residents of Charlottetown and other municipalities are being funded properly and being delivered responsibly. And I think it's a matter of determining, how, and bringing forward data and a business case to say, these are what things, these are what residents need. This is how we're going to fund them, and this is how we're going to share the revenue between municipalities and the province, and some services are provided to areas outside of municipalities as well that in some cases our city bears the cost of providing. So that's kind of the more distant history, but more recently, Betty and I attended a meeting at the Federation of Municipalities office back on February 17th. The meeting was well attended by key staff from Summerside, Stratford, Cornwall, Three Rivers, Surrey, and Tignish. It was reported at that time that the province had agreed to consider funding a study which would benefit all municipalities in the province by gathering, presenting, and comparing data from other jurisdictions with respect to service levels, which level of government provides the service, provincial municipal fiscal arrangements, and also to analyze property tax regimes. To undertake this work, the province has asked that a steering committee be established with representation from the province to ensure that the terms of reference are non-partisan, which we believe is reasonable. We anticipate funding would flow to perhaps a third party like the Federation, with the work to be overseen by the steering committee. Management at the Federation will hopefully facilitate this initiative. It's my expectation that the research here will be relatively high level and will provide key foundational data for the province and the municipalities on which we can support specific funding asks. This will allow Charlottetown to focus on our specific needs pertaining to the services that we deliver or expect to deliver in the future with our anticipated growth. There was agreement that the municipalities would retain a negotiator to represent the municipalities, but that we should wait until the provincially funded research is completed before engaging a negotiator, so that we have something meaningful to talk about. The Federation will draft a resolution to be passed by the respective councils to cost share the negotiator pro rata on the amount of provincial funding currently received, and when received, we'll bring that to council for consideration. We advised the group that Charlottetown would be making representations to the province soon in consultation with the Federation to request additional funding support as an interim measure in anticipation of delays in reaching a new agreement. The Federation asked if municipalities were prepared to give them a mandate to negotiate on our behalf, and the position that we communicated was that we did not expect council would hand over that authority, that we would want to maintain our authority to negotiate or to at least endorse or accept or deny, refuse the package that's negotiated. And that was our position was really a hard no, and that was echoed by the major municipalities of Cornwall, Stratford, Summerside, and Three Rivers. So we believe that the key areas for the negotiation will focus on the primary services of street maintenance, policing, recreational infrastructure, emergency management, including the operation of reception centers, transit, and fire services. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that, Dan. Talking about timelines, I guess the first piece of that, waiting for the study and working in collaboration with the Federation, and that there's certainly anyway, that's the right word or not, but a bureaucracy, a time. I don't know how long that would potentially would take. So I want to come back and focus on, and we've talked about this. Yourself, and it is the interim measure. What are we going to do? I mean, we're a capital city. We've got demands and needs. I'm not saying that are greater than other municipalities, but the reality is there's a part of that that's the truth. And we've got immediate budget needs, financial needs that I'm hoping that if we can get some kind of an interim measure, presentation, whatever we have to do to get together, and again, sharing this, I guess, with whoever we have to share it with, as well. I just kind of want to focus, I guess, long term, we got to be aware of what the end game is as you laid it out. But for today's purpose, I want to get a sense of a timeline on what we can do interim. Because as we, I think the committee and recognizes there was an RFP went out on this, right? And we've had 3 responses that varied substantially in terms of, a dollar figure. I'm just wondering, where that fits if we are going to take an interim measure to take a run at this to get something to the province, because the need's there. Does the RFP mean anything on an interim thing, or does the RFP maybe mean nothing if the province is part of it? Yeah. Anyway, just what's your advice and comment on that?
Thank you, Chair. So when I reviewed the responses to the RFP for the needs analysis, it became evident that a good portion of the work to be done in responding to that RFP is a baseline analysis of where we are in relation to other municipalities and other municipal provincial funding arrangements. Not specific to Charlottetown, but specific to, other municipalities in PEI and kind of we don't have a basis for comparing ourselves to Halifax or Sydney or Moncton or really Ontario or others. And a good chunk of the value of those responses to the RFP focused on that work. We felt that work was of value not just to Charlottetown, but also to other municipalities in PEI and probably to the provincial government as well, so that we would have the basis for an analysis-based or data-based analysis of the needs and funding requirements, as opposed to, going with our hand out saying we need more money, and the province having the ability to say, for what? What do you need it for? What are you going to do with it? What are your funding shortfalls? So the idea was hatched to approach the province to see if they would at least share in funding that portion of the needs analysis, which would benefit the province and other municipalities. And in tandem with that, we would continue to do our own work, perhaps continuing with a more narrowly focused RFP that would be specific to Charlottetown's needs. And that would, some of that business case, for example, on our policing, we receive a specific tax credit for providing policing services from the province. We heard from the chief during our budget workshops that the tickets issued and the arrests made are only 50% issued to people who sleep in the city of Charlottetown. So we're policing a much broader area than the city of Charlottetown. So is there an argument to be made for getting a share of not just the revenue that the province collects within the city, but perhaps some of the surrounding areas as well? So that's one argument that we could make. So the thought is that, in the same way that the province has asked us to, kind of give them some time to give them some room to continue to operate an outreach center while they get their house in order, because they have a need to service those clients that need that service. I think it would be prudent for us to make a representation to the province to say, we have some funding needs in road maintenance, street maintenance, policing, some things that we know specifically are perhaps underfunded in terms of the cost of providing the service, and we have that data now. So the thought would be,
and again, you're talking an interim basis.
Yep. So the thought would be that we would at least approach them with an argument to say, look, perhaps you'd consider funding, bumping up the funding until we get this agreement hammered out because we have needs. The province clearly has the ability to just say no. We're not going to entertain that until we reach an agreement with all the municipalities. And we've heard some feedback from the province indirectly in the past few days that they would prefer to wait until the negotiation is concluded before entertaining any other action. But that doesn't prevent us from asking and making a case to provide for the services that we feel are underfunded.
And on that, excuse me, and on that point, in putting these interim numbers and for an ask together, we're only collecting and doing data that would be doing anyway for part of the bigger picture. So it's not a duplication is that correct?
Correct, Chair, and in fact, it's data that we have already. So, in terms of our financial statements, we have segmented financial reporting for fire, police, and road maintenance, that kind of thing. So, there's a certain amount of that we can compare to the funding that we're receiving from the province on the street maintenance and policing in particular, and do a comparison and say, here's where we're short.
Thanks for a go at that, Dan. I'm sure there's going to be questions. Any questions from committee?
I'll go first.
Mayor Brown?
Okay. So, again, Dan, I don't see what you gave the report. Do you have a copy of it that you can send to us? Because I just wanted to go through some of those primary services that you stated. You could just send that up, not right away. So the province has hired Ron McLeod, right, from HR Associates,
Correct.
and the city's not going to hire anyone. We're going to wait for FPEIM to hire someone to represent the interests of the city, the province. Can you clarify that, please? Just through the chair, through.
Go ahead, Dan.
There's no specific decision been made, but the discussion at the meeting at the Federation on the 17th was, should we hire a negotiator as a group of municipalities if we're negotiating with the province as a group? And my suggestion was that you shouldn't go into a gunfight with a butter knife, and if the province has a negotiator, then probably the municipality should as well. Whether the city of Charlottetown should have a negotiator on their own is a point that is open for discussion, and certainly is a point that we may want to have a discussion at this committee and a council in terms of how we want to proceed, but certainly no decision has been made.
Okay, so again, Mr. Chair, I'm just trying to clarify. Mr. Chair, we started this discussion last fall with a group that was looking into, how to get a better tax equity from the province. And now FPEIM, the Federation of Prince Edward Island Municipalities, want to sign on, get the city of Charlottetown to sign on what they're looking for. But correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, and you should know this because you worked with municipal government affairs. There are only two fully serviced communities on the island, and that would be Summerside and Charlottetown, and the other 56 or 57 would be partial services or completely dependent on the province to take care of roads, maintenance, and so forth. Is that correct?
There are only two municipalities that do road maintenance and provide policing services and have a water and sewer utility. So the two capital cities, or the two cities, Summerside and Charlottetown. We often talk about the big 4 or 5. So Stratford and Cornwall would be higher service level municipalities, and Three Rivers now is coming on side. So part of the challenge I think you're highlighting is we would have different needs than virtually all of the other municipalities in terms of what our priorities might be. So that is a difficulty in being party to a negotiation with a number of other family members, if you will, when you may have one family member that likes baseball and somebody else likes hockey, and do you build a baseball field or a hockey rink? That is a question that we need to consider is, how best do we engage with the municipalities or with the federation, with other municipalities and the province. I think the province's motivation, is not to have 58 separate agreements, but to try to encapsulate as much as possible the funding arrangement with all municipalities. My own opinion on that is that it may be very difficult to have one agreement to address all the municipalities. Perhaps there's an agreement that gets reached with the cities, and maybe a second agreement that is with the towns that have a lower level of service, and then maybe a third agreement with the rural municipalities that have very limited service levels or none. Yeah. None of which has been laid out or articulated in the province's position or the federation's position. I think the federation would like to keep everybody in the same tent negotiating. They're a member-based entity, advocacy group, and they have members that they want to protect. But it's a very loosely defined process, Your Worship, and one that is hard to push for action and decisions. I agree with you.
Councillor Drown? Councillor McCabe?
Jumping in, as I'm sorry for being late. I had a situation at work that I had to stay for, but I would agree that I don't think you can negotiate. I don't think Charlottetown and some of the smaller municipalities are comparable. I think that we need to look at what do we need as a city as we continue to grow. And you're right, we're not just, our services aren't just dealing with our city either. We're dealing with, and where does everybody come to? A lot of people are coming into our city. So our roads are used more. There's lots of things that we have to look at as far as that. I definitely think that it can't be a one umbrella for municipalities for sure.
And again, Dan, I just kind of want to maybe circle back to, at a high level, I feel it seems, the province, the province is kind of, waiting. They got to, I guess they realize the municipalities or through the federation or some kind of collaboration that something's going to be coming at them, and I understand, or somewhat understand the Federation of PI municipalities is kind of realizing this is obviously, an important item, and then, maybe they're kind of wondering, because we're the largest municipality with the biggest budget demands, what are we going to do? And then we're wondering what, if it, so funneling it down to this interim thing, if I could, do you kind of, between yourself and the CAO, do you have a path for us, a suggestion for us on this, what we can go at them with on an interim basis, if that's fair to put that question to you on the spot here? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. What I've suggested is that we, in relatively short order, just compile, a 2 or 3 page request for interim funding with, quick analysis in terms of the cost to provide those key services that the existing agreement or the one that's just lapsed already covers, and highlight the fact that there are other services that we now know that and recognize that we're providing to residents outside the city. We had a conversation this week with managers of one of the recreation facilities, and they talked about how, you know, their costs are not shared equally by the people that use it, the cost to run those facilities. So there are to review those services that I had highlighted: the street maintenance, policing, recreation facilities, emergency management, including the operation reception centers, transit, and fire would be the key ones.
Councillor Drown?
Thank you, Chair McAleer, and thank you for that, Dan. I certainly agree with your thought process on that. Is to, you know, we embarked on this 6 months ago to try to get a funding process in place for this upcoming budget, and you know we're in need of extra funding because of what we do as a capital city of the province. So, you know, if we can get something together instead of waiting, you know, by the time you get a report and you're going to be into next year's budget, that's not going to help us. So, you know, I agree with your thought process of getting something together over the next couple of days, get it into them. We didn't ask, you know, they have the ability to say no, but if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So if we get it to them and, you know, we're meeting next week, maybe we could sit down and discuss it again. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jack. And just in respect to the timeline, I might, Councillor Drong, maybe just throw or suggest maybe if we can get this budget out of the way and that be a short-term priority, maybe after, if that's a fair request.
I believe it's reasonable. I think our request would not meet the province's budget cycle. You know, that we're well beyond that. The request, if it was going to be in this fiscal year's budget, would have been, deadline would have been November or October last fall. But that's not to say that we shouldn't ask, because, you know, there are provisions made. You know, I think if we at least start the discussion with a demonstration of what our needs are, and then we can, you know, broaden that to different services and narrow the focus a little bit in terms of the specific needs that we have. You know, the sooner we begin that dialogue with the province and have a meaningful demonstration that we do have significant needs that aren't being addressed, and demonstrate to the province what the residents of PEI generally will get in exchange for that, because we know we're serving as a capital city more than just the residents of Charlottetown. So I have no reason to believe that the province is not, you know, a fair partner in the funding discussions, but I think that they need more than a simple handout to say we want X dollars without a demonstration of why we need it and what we're going to use it for.
Thank you. And just to kind of close out on this, we got to get the budget stuff. But these two items are important in my mind. That I do want to give them the time that I feel they deserve. And just see, Eleanor, to put you on the spot, do you have any comments just on this piece that you'd like to share with us in terms of what Dan, the director, has shared on this? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think I have much to add. Dan's laid it out quite nicely. I think it's important as we move through this process that we really work to maintain the relationships with the province as we negotiate, but also the relationships with the other municipalities in terms of working together to find an agreement.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, just before we close, I know you've put a closure on it, but the agreement from 2017 to 2022, our share was 59 cents. With CUSA, it was 66 cents that we took back, and that was always called the 34 cents that the province kept. And as you said, Dan, the MOU that will be signed with each municipality. Or did you say they're looking at a blanket MOU for all municipalities? Can you clarify that before I ask another question?
Yeah, it was a little bit of an enigma last time through. So the signatories were the province and the two cities, and all of the towns, with the exception of North Rustico. And because they were late to the table, they only became a town kind of mid-process. And Borden Carleton did not sign the MOU because they felt they were going to be, didn't feel they were going to be treated fairly. But they were given the benefit of the funding formula that was contained in the MOU. The Federation of Municipalities was not a signatory to that agreement.
No.
Yeah.
No, it's FPEI represents the communities. They don't represent, they're not an entity in themselves. And the tax credit components are based on street maintenance, police, development control, development inspection. So you broaden it by including transit, fire. I don't think fire is something that they looked at because fire services are provided by all communities, so that's not a dedicated service. You know, we got an uphill battle trying to get it from that 59 cents to 66, let's say, or more. And that's for the residential. As for the non-residential, they collect $1.50 on the $100 assessment. We collect $2.36, but we don't get any money, no tax credits from the commercial, $1.50. So that has to be put on the table too. And I say that because, you know, you mentioned the summary ticket sharing of, you know, between the province. That's not stable funding. We need stable funding, which is through the taxes that are collected by the province and municipalities. That's where we have to focus. And as for an interim, yeah, we can make the interim ask, but as you know, the budget process for the province is already past the date for submission. So we can make that request, which I hope we do. And just last night, as you know, let's just listen to the consultations that we're going to, or will be attending or hosting. Public consultation for 199 Grafton Street, 158 units. Public consultation for Hillsborough Park Community Concept, 12 to 1,400 units. Public consultation for 503 University Avenue, another 270 units. St. Martha's Court, that's a development concept plan amendment to St. Martha's Court. And then we have other public meetings to come up because of applications that are in the hopper. And then we do have the Cassidy Group that are looking at 1,800 units on Malpeque Road. Like, that's going to be a lot of demands on our infrastructure, whether it's roads, streets, multi-use paved pathways, active transportation pathways, sidewalks, water, wastewater, transit, climate action. Like, I don't think, like, just to think that, I know some provincial officials have said, all the city has to do is just raise the taxes. Well, that's not an option. You know, we only have one form of taxation, that's property tax. The province and the feds, they have personal income tax, corporate income tax, consumption tax, excise tax, property tax. Oh, that's right too, they get property tax, and they get equalization payments. We get one. So we have to get a better share. And like for the capital city and a city that is fully serviced, that was under the CUSA, Comprehensive Urban Services Agreement, right from the amalgamation in '93. You know, we had 66 cents. We're now down to 59. We have to shorten that gap and get something from that property, commercial property tax of $1.50 that they take in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. Thanks for that, Dan. And just to circle back, as Mayor Brown requested, if you would, just your notes on the procurement bylaw and the funding formula background would be great if you could share with the committee. Thank you. So moving along, Dan, you're still on. Moving on to the operating and capital budgets. We have an operating draft operating budget that Dan is going to speak to, and a capital budget that's not done yet, but talking about dollars, as it says in the, the background here, the draft capital budget. And the draft capital budget is still being developed and prioritized. Currently, the capital budget requests and operational needs, big word here for me, far exceed what the city can afford. This prioritization will occur over the next weeks, and an additional meeting for the Finance, Audit, and Tendering Committee will be booked. Anyway, again, back to the funding formula. But anyway, that's leave the comments on that. And Dan, just if you could share with us what you can on these two budgets, starting with the operating. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll run through the report because I think it contains a lot of important information that all of the committee may not have had the benefit of reading. But the draft budget has been completed to be brought to committee, but it's a step that has been reached with a lot of pre-work that's gone on prior to this. We had a community budget survey in October, November. We had budget workshops in November with all of the departments. Council identified overall budget priorities. We've received feedback from respective committees, and we have an awareness within staff and council and the departments of our operational needs. A key aspect of prioritization in the operational budget was to ensure that the city provides citizens with the level of service they expect, while also addressing rising operational costs, workforce needs, inflation, and economic impacts beyond the city's control. From an operational perspective, early work has commenced on a new corporate business plan that will outline how the corporation will meet council's strategic plan and deliver programs, services, and capital projects over the next number of years. The draft corporate matrix, background matrix in your packages as attachment E, has been used by administration in the budget preparation process to gain a full picture of workload across the organization in terms of function, strategic direction, operational projects, and programs. It has also helped administration identify where workforce resources are needed for maintaining existing service levels and to complete much-needed work to modernize the city's operations to keep up with population growth. The draft corporate background matrix also includes an organizational chart with the structure needed to support the delivery of council's strategic plan while meeting the demands placed on the city's corporation. The org chart includes 5 divisions: integrated growth, community services, finance and corporate services, fire services, and policing. There are 3 directors and 2 chiefs leading the divisions, with either managers, deputy chiefs, or supervisors reporting to them. The KPM governance review is attached in attachment F and has also assisted budget preparation by identifying some operational structure and workforce needs. The draft capital budget, as you mentioned, Chair, is still being developed and prioritized, scrutinized. Currently, the capital budget requests far exceed the capacity of the city to afford. And this prioritization or scrutinization will happen over the next week or so with an additional meeting. The November budget workshop, Council held a workshop to kick off the 24-25 budget process at the city, and it demonstrated Council's commitment to transparency, accountability, and trust, as outlined in the strategic plan. Helped to implement the governance and engagement, civic engagement pillar of our strategic plan. To provide council and the public with a current snapshot of existing city policies, services, and programs, along with successes and challenges. For council to provide direction to administration and council committees on prioritized themes, policies, services, and programs to be included in the 24-25 city budget. The notes from the workshop are in attachment C, and they provide a summary of actions and priorities identified in the meetings. During day 2 of the workshop, Council agreed that the individual members of Council would send their top 5 overall budget priorities to the Chief Administrative Officer to be summarized. This information is included in attachment D. Some background on the KPMG governance report. Between October 22 and January of 23, KPMG was engaged by the City of Charlottetown to undertake a review of the organizational structure of the city. The objectives of the project were to determine priorities and opportunities for the city's reporting relationships and suggest improvements, to determine priorities and opportunities in the city's organizational structure, but including but not limited to, recommendations or options for overall organizational structure, and specifically the leadership team based on an analysis and evaluation, research, and consultation, recommendations or options for departmental functions in terms of workflow and alignment with priorities, and identification of opportunities for the enhancement and empowerment of staff to make decisions that are in the best interests of the city through the review of decision-making structures and processes. The KPMG report recommended a straw model with 2 divisions led by deputy CAOs or directors, along with police services and fire services. The straw model was created with the city's core project team, which consisted of an interim CAO, interim director, a strategic initiatives officer who was on contract, and the acting human resources manager, and in consultation with all department heads. The report states that the draft organizational structure was to be shared with the incoming CAO for consideration, as indicated on page 65 at the top introductory paragraph. I believe it's very important to note KPMG's report states, quote, and I quote, "While the straw model of the future shows 2 divisions under the CAO, excluding fire and police, there is flexibility to have 2 to 4 divisions under the CAO depending on preference," indicated on page 65 with the asterisks on the lower right-hand side. The comparable municipalities contained in the report included City of Halifax, City of Fredericton, Cornwall, Ontario, Innisfil, Ontario, and St. John's, Newfoundland. All of these comparable municipalities had at least 4 directors, general managers, deputy CAOs, with a line of managers under them. There's some history there in terms of reference if you care to watch any of the budget sessions for familiarization in the report. And that's really a summarization of where we are today. I did hand out a package of 5 documents. The first one is an update on the kind of the timing of the development of the financial plan. So those steps up to February brought us to department heads meeting with finance and going through budget deliberations. Senior leadership started working with a draft operational budget with a list of new initiatives under consideration that were moved forward to finance for consideration. And that discussion started Tuesday a week ago and just really wrapped up on yesterday. The draft budget is here today. We do have also a preliminary draft budget for the capital items that we'll also present today with some commentary. The plan is to bring budget to the financial plan to a meeting of council on March 4th, a special meeting of council for consideration of the financial plan. And then that draft financial plan would be also available to the public at a public meeting in respect of the financial plan on Monday, March 11th. There is another regular meeting of council on Tuesday, March 12th, if there is any additional deliberations, discussions that would be necessary. We have the time between today and that meeting on March 12th to have additional meetings with this committee if there are additional deliberations you'd like to undertake. But it's important that we have that meeting on March 12th to meet the MGA requirements to have that meeting at least 2 weeks before adoption of the budget, of the financial plan. And that financial plan has to be adopted before the end of March. So that's kind of the timing of where we are at this point. The next document is the draft operating budget. which I will share on the screen. So to run through the layout of this document, revenue is shown on top. We have a first column indicates the previous year budget, or the budget year that we're currently in. We had budgeted revenue of $73 million. We're currently forecasting our revenue to come in a little higher than that, at about $77 million. Moving forward into the next budget year, our forecast of revenue is increased to $79.8 million, or pretty handy $80 million. We have indicated additional revenue that can be obtained through the new initiatives that we are moving forward for, or recommending for approval. And those revenues relate specifically to the Housing Accelerator Fund and some initiatives that can be funded directly through that funding. So there is a little bit of a bump, which brings us up over $80 million, $80.5 million. Our budgeted expenditures, in terms of previous year budget, we had budgeted about $79 million. Our forecast for this year is about $73 million. Our budget forecast for the coming fiscal year is a little shy of $83 million. We are moving forward, are recommending new initiatives to the tune of $1.8 million, which will bring our expenditures to $84,687.60. What has been that is the city government side. We also budget for the water and sewer annual operations separately. So you can see there we had a budgeted revenue of $15.1 million, and we're forecasting a little higher than our budgeted number for the current fiscal year. Our expenditures were budgeted at 15.6, and they're coming in a little lower, looks like at 13.8, so we're budgeting a little bit of a surplus in the utility this year. And combined with the 4.3 million we're forecasting in the city operating surplus, combining that with the water and sewer utility, the consolidated corporate surplus that we're projecting on an operational basis is 5.7 million. To move that across to look at the overall, what that might mean for past practice. So the MGA provides that you can include a forecasted surplus from the current fiscal year and use it to either reduce your revenue that has to be generated through taxation for the coming fiscal year, or to reduce the expenditures. So we're permitted under the MGA to use that budgeted surplus or forecast surplus of $5.7 million to offset our need for revenue or to permit additional expenditures in the coming fiscal year. So with that in mind, and understanding that there are lots of new operational demands coming to provide the services that residents are looking for, and we're hoping to provide. We have utilized some of those surplus funds to fund some new initiatives that we believe are consistent with the strategic plan, the operational priorities that have been brought forward by council and the departments, and would be supported by residents of Charlottetown taxpayers. The second page the third page of the document that I handed out goes through the new initiatives, and that's repeated here online for those that would care to review that. And I'll walk through those one by one. So the first priority that's listed is the Director of Community Services position, which we referred to in the report briefly, but is also a top priority for senior leadership. The annual net operating cost of that initiative is budgeted to be $179,000, including benefits and payroll taxes, etc. It would be considered an annual recurring cost because it would be a permanent position. So we've indicated here that there would be a full-time equivalent. And the Y in highlighted in yellow indicates that it is a new initiative that has been recommended by the senior leadership team, the two directors, the two chiefs, and the CAO for the consideration of council. So the net operating cost of that new initiative would be $179,550. The second new initiative is a city solicitor. The thinking on that is that a lot of the services that we relegate to our legal firm can be procedural and somewhat project management to some extent. And the suggestion has been made that we could probably at least save our legal fees and have more ready access to a staff city solicitor. We project the cost of that position at $157,044, but we believe that we would obtain a savings in legal fees at least equivalent to that amount. So no net forecast operating cost increase by doing that because we would have the savings in legal fees. We would expect that would be a recurring annual cost, and it would be a full-time equivalent position. And senior leadership has recommended that to go ahead to council for consideration. The next item is a city communications officer. It will be a second communications officer that would be permanent. The annual operating cost for that is budgeted to be $98,000. There's no annual operating saving or funding available for that directly. We discussed this at quite at length. You'll see later in the new initiative list, the police chief had requested a community liaison communications officer. And the senior leadership team discussed this at length and determined that we could effectively take this position, the second communications officer, house them at the police station, and have them essentially dedicated to emergency services. So policing, fire, and emergency management. But it would be more of a corporate service, so service to all of the emergency services that we have throughout the city corporation. So we, as a senior leadership team, have moved that position forward as a recommendation, and the net operating cost of that would be about $97,000. There was a request from the communications supervisor for a new website. The annual operating cost of that would be about $20,000 with annual operating savings from our old website of about $8,000 for a net operating cost of about $12,000 per year. It would be a recurring annual amount. Senior leadership thought that we should probably hold off on that. There would be a capital cost to build that website, and that is in the amount of about $200,000. We felt that although it was a very, it was an initiative that we thought was worthy and could be very beneficial, we did feel with balancing the other demands that it was one that we could kick down the road a little bit. There was a request for a new position, an IT manager, that was essentially a reclassification of the role that's being fulfilled by our senior IT staff, to turn that into a manager's position, which reflects the duties that this employee is currently fulfilling. The total cost of that position would be about $127,000. The proposal was to save the position that individual was acting in for a net operational cost of about $13,500. Senior leadership decided to defer or decline that ask, as we felt that other operational requirements were perhaps at a higher priority. And in support with respect to that, the other request from IT services was for an additional support technician, and the annual cost of that was $78,000. And senior leadership did feel that that was a valuable addition, and has been recommended to council for consideration. There is a requirement for digital forensic services, which is an IT service that is essentially a requirement for the police services to participate in information sharing with other police services. It's an upgrade and is more or less a must-have to continue with our current policing model, and the annual cost of that is estimated at $75,000. We move that ahead for approval to budget for consideration of council. There is a planning and permitting technology solution that has been identified, very much in keeping with the objectives of the Housing Accelerator Fund and undertakings to improve our planning permitting process. This package, as has been reviewed and considered, there are a few different suppliers, but the costing on this seems to be similar. The annual operating cost of about $121,000. We've reviewed the Housing Accelerator Fund agreement, and that would be an item that would qualify for coverage. So we would annually, in this fiscal year, we would see no net operating cost, as would be the case for the next 3 years, so a total of 3 years. And that has been moved forward recommended for consideration. There is an agenda management software tool which would assist in the management of our many meetings and document management. It would also replace the reliance on YouTube for hosting our meetings and streaming our meetings and storing those the archives of the meetings. It's a robust assisting technology that we feel would bring value to council and the efficient running of the city, and that's been moved forward as well in the amount of $30,000. Environment and Sustainability has requested an administrative assistant position move from casual to permanent at a gross cost of $69,000. It would result in an operating saving of $59,000, so about an additional cost of $10,000. Senior leadership did not feel that would have priority this time through, but could be considered down the road. Environment and Sustainability also requested a sustainability project coordinator be moved from a casual position to a permanent, and similarly, cost of $77,000 gross with a saving of $66,800 in the casual position for an additional cost of $11,000. And senior leadership felt that we could hold off on that one as well. Economic Development has received a request from the Confederation of the Arts for funding, capital funding, what they consider capital funding over the next 5 years of $500,000. Sorry, $5 million, $100,000 each year. This request was dealt with at council earlier in 2023. The resolution of council at that time was to approve a $200,000 contribution for each of the next, for each of 5 years, totaling $1 million over a 5-year period. The Confederation Centre has come back with a follow-up request to say thank you for the contribution of $200,000, but we would still like you to consider the larger request of $5 million. $1 million over each of 5 years. So the request has been put forward here as an operational grant in the amount of $960,000, which is the $5 million less the $200,000 received divided by 4 years remaining, so or 5 years remaining, so $960 per year. Senior leadership at this point has not recommended this this contribution at this stage based on other priorities. It's important to note that the Confederation Centre does receive a considerable grant in lieu and in excess of $200,000 a year. There's an additional $50,000 operating grant and the $200,000 commitment for the next 5 years. So there is a fairly substantial commitment there by the city that is currently in place. Economic Development also requested funding to rent a barge for the fireworks that's hosted on Canada Day. This is a safety issue and to enhance the enjoyment of the fireworks display. This gives the operators of the fireworks the ability to go offshore out of harm's way in terms of having to keep crowds back, having smoke and debris falling on crowds, and just gives a nice buffer and more visibility for the fireworks. The cost of that is $20,000, and senior leadership has moved that forward for your consideration. Economic Development also requested a civic event support staff, which would not be a full-time position, but would be event-specific support for staffing. It's getting more and more difficult to find volunteer help to run these events. So these staff could assist with the event management and planning, and senior leadership felt that this was a worthy initiative. Economic Development has also moved forward a reconciliation roadmap and an equity, diversity and inclusion roadmap project to develop a plan for the city moving forward to address the question of truth and reconciliation and our path forward on equity, diversity and inclusion. Cost of that is estimated at $50,000. It would be a study, a one-time cost, and that has been recommended for council's consideration. The last ask from Economic Development was a post-budget arts and culture grant intake, which would give them some flexibility after the cutoff in November for grant requests. The ask was for $25,000, and senior leadership has recommended that not be moved forward to council. The next item speaks to the discussion we had on the procurement bylaw, but it's an initiative from finance for a financial analyst, which would take the form of a consulting contract, and the provision or forecast cost of that would be $100,000, and senior leadership felt that that was a worthy initiative. The fire department has made a request for 2 shift supervisors. It is expected that the shift duration will move from an 8-hour shift to a 24-hour shift. with 3 firefighters on duty at any time. And this brings about the necessity to have a shift supervisor on duty at the same time. The forecast cost of those 2 positions is $194,000, and senior leadership has suggested that that is something that council we're recommending for approval. The fire chief had requested a deputy fire chief, administration and prevention, but in discussion with the senior leadership team, the decision was made that it was a higher priority to move to the 2 shift supervisors to complement the new requirements in terms of the changes in the shifts, to 24 hours and 3-manned Station 1. So that was withdrawn. A third position, third request of the fire chief was a fire inspector on contract. That would be estimated a cost of $97,000. That, because of the connection with fire inspection of building plans and new construction and housing growth, can be funded through the Housing Accelerator funding. So we would suggest that that would be funding for the duration of the Housing Accelerator Fund, so for 3 years, and that additional revenue is reflected in the funding column there. So no net cost, additional operating cost to the budget, and it would result in 1 full-time equivalent, but it would just be a contract. It wouldn't continue beyond that funding unless there was additional funding beyond. And that was recommended. Training and Development Officer was requested by Human Resources. We felt that this was an important initiative, but just didn't quite make it to the priority list in terms of the other requests. So it was not moved forward. Parks and Recreation had requested a Parks Foreman position be created, a new position, cost of $87,571. The senior leadership team recommends that position for approval at a net cost of $87,571. Parks and Rec also requested 2 permanent parks maintenance staff, and the cost forecast for that was $106,970. Senior leadership has not moved that forward for consideration, but would be something what would be considered down the road as funding required, or permitted, I should say. Planning and Heritage has made a request for an additional building inspector. Similar to the fire inspector, this is something that we could fund under the Housing Accelerator agreement. Estimated cost of about $86,000, and with the revenue to go along with that. Again, it would be a contract position while the funding lasts, and so no net additional operating cost above and beyond what would be considered the go-forward status quo budget. The next item is a GIS specialist for Planning and Heritage to assist in the planning work that goes on there in terms of preparing permits and submissions to council for amendments and presentations. The estimated cost of that was $86,000. Again, something that would qualify for Housing Accelerator funding. So no net additional cost to the status quo budget, and we have recommended that for consideration. Moving into police, Chief McConnell had requested 10 new officers, and in discussion at length with senior leadership, has amended his request to 5 for the current fiscal year. I suspect we'll have another request next year, but given the fact that there has been 6 approved, he seemed to be satisfied that he could work with an additional 5, so that budget was reduced from a $1.3 million ask to $650,000 for 5 new full-time equivalents. The police have requested a retention salary adjustment. I'll try to explain this, and you may want to get some further clarification from the Chief of Police on this. But essentially, in order to proceed with the hiring of the 6 officers that have been approved, it creates a bit of an uncomfortable situation from a staffing and retention point of view, where existing officers with the same or more experience as the officers that would be hired at a higher level, you might create some, there may be some negative consequences in terms of loss of existing staff. So the proposal was to take those, there was a total of 12 positions, 7 constables at Class 2 constables would move to Class 1, and 5 Class 3 constables would move to a Class 2. And that was estimated at a cost of $211,000. Really almost a chicken and egg question with the 6 new hires. In order to get them in place, we felt that this needed to be done in close proximity to those hires. So we've moved that forward for approval. Cost of $211,000. The chief had recommended 4 additional records clerks to handle a lot of the intake that the additional policing demands are putting on the existing admin staff. The chief has agreed to put those on hold for the time being. The last request from the police service was for a community and media liaison, or communications person, to be housed and dedicated to the city's police service. As I mentioned earlier, after a great deal of discussion and listening to suggestions from council that we look at a corporate services delivery model and try to get out of our silos, we've earmarked that position in the communications department, but it would be housed in, or recommended that it be housed in the police station, but also serve the fire service and emergency management. So this individual application was not recommended to go forward, but part of the function of this role, or this request, would be covered by the new initiative that we have recommended to go forward through the communications department. Public Works had made a request for a new superintendent. We did not move that forward to council. Forecast cost of $102,000. A municipal engineer on contract. Our municipal engineer was requested by Public Works. Forecast cost of $108,658. That position could be funded through the Housing Accelerator Fund to assist in our objectives of that agreement. So no net additional operating cost above and beyond the status quo budget. So that would result in one contract position, which would survive by agreement no longer than the funding that's in place to support that position. Similarly, a civil technician on contract was a request. One position at an estimated cost of $94,000 would qualify for accelerator funding as well. No net additional cost to the status quo budget, so we did recommend that one for consideration by council. Getting close to the end here, Public Works maintenance cleaner position. With the operational requirements, particularly at Simmons, with the new facility coming on board, we felt that was important to do that on a year-round basis. There would be forecast operational savings of about 44,700 in terms of contract and casual staff that we have now, for a net annual operating cost addition of 31,000. And we believe we recommended that one for council's approval. There was a request for a Public Works Building and Maintenance Electrician, one permanent position. Most of this work is currently being done by contractors. While we did feel there was some merit in having a full-time electrician, would be convenient and perhaps valuable, there was concern that the electrician might often need to have more than one, there might be a need for more than one electrician, so difficulty sometimes doing that work as a standalone individual, and that there may be capital requirements in terms of additional bucket trucks and equipment. So we seem to be, the thought was that we seem to be getting along okay with the contracting that we're doing currently, but that we could consider that moving forward after a little more deliberation on that specific position. There was also a request from Public Works for 2 junior engineer positions, which would, be sourced. The thought was that we would work in conjunction with the engineering school at UPI and identify some potential new employees for the city through term positions. But we felt that at this point in time, we could move that one forward for budget approval at this point. So if you look at the bottom here, in terms of the FTE column, we started with a request for 36 new full-time equivalents. We have worked that down to 18, with a total recommended net operating cost increase of 1.8 million. And how that translates into our budget forecast, our recommended budget for the coming fiscal year. So this is the $1.819 million that would be added to our forecast expenditures of 82,867,428 before new initiatives. Up on the revenue column, we have that housing accelerator funding revenue that would offset some of those costs to the tune of about 593,000. So in the end, we would add 1.2 million to the net operating costs through funding those new initiatives that have been recommended for approval by council. The net effect of that would be a forecast deficit in the city operations of $4.2 million. That matches up, or in connection with the small forecast deficit in the water and sewer utility of 245,000, would give us a total forecast operating deficit for the current fiscal year of $4.454 million. And you'll notice in green, the 5.7 is the forecast surplus that we have. So we have the ability within the MGA to use those funds to go against what would otherwise be a forecast operating deficit. So we've applied that full amount to that deficit, and that would leave us with a residual of that forecast surplus of $1.3 million that we could put in a reserve to apply to our long-term debt, prepay some of that. So happy to answer any questions. We have a number of department heads here. If you have specific requests or questions in terms of individual departments, that is the operating budget summary that I have for you folks today.
Hey, Dan, you may want to take a drink of water. Talking there for a while. Just if you could for me, I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions. Just on the new initiatives, the grid, the DH priority, in 1, 2, 3, 4. Can you quantify that for me, please?
Yes, Chair. So the DH priority is the department head priority. So each of the initiatives that we had put forward by the departments, we asked them if they were to, or if they were only to get 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5, which would they want to have approved? So they rank them as their priority in terms of importance to the operation of that department.
And if you could, I just, if you don't mind, just going back to the top of the new initiatives, the first 1, 2, 3, 4, the first 4, could you, I've just been make a note here of what you've been saying yes and no to, not to just, could you just confirm those first 4 for me?
Sure. So if you look at, you have your printed page there in front of
Yep.
you with, so if you go to the right, there's a column in yellow.
Yep.
And there's either a
Okay, yes.
Y or an H or an N. So the
Okay.
Y are recommended, and then the cost associated with them is
Okay,
in the column next to
okay,
them.
perfect, okay.
H would be a hold, yeah.
And the Housing Accelerator Fund funding there, is that 3 years when?
Yes.
Thank you. I'll open it up to the committee. Councillor McCabe, got
Thank
the
you.
light first, thank that
Thank
I
you
see.
for the presentation, Dan. So, a couple clarifications. The first one, the 10 new police officers amended to 5. The 5 over and above the 6 we've just approved a few months ago, which takes us to 11 new officers for this budget. Is that correct?
That's correct. So
Okay.
the 6 were approved for this current fiscal
Okay.
year.
No, I'm just
And then
making-
another
Another
5
5
for
over and above, okay?
24, 25. Correct.
And under comms, I see that we had the first ask that senior management's recommending that we move on. The approved budget was 97,000. In the police comms position, the price was 108,000, say, 107,920. What difference? Is there different specializations, or is there a reason why there'd be a difference in salary? Is it a different need for that position?
I don't have an exact answer for you, but I suspect there was a different assumption by the manager in terms of what step that comms person would start at. So the chief may have been contemplating perhaps a little more experienced
So the
individual.
role of the comms officer for the city would have no different requirements for EMO or police or?
I'll defer to the CIO, Mohammed.
Through the chair, if I may. Yes, there's different kind of training for this kind of comms person. It's someone who's more experienced in emergency management. The point of this position is it's actually housed in police services, so they're involved in the briefings that happen. But they're also highly involved with fire services in terms of briefing. So they have that emergency management knowledge in terms of the communications that would be going out. So one thing I would say, and Dan's done a really fabulous presentation in terms of laying this all out, in terms of the discussions and how we prioritize things, everything is on the list is a priority. It's just a decision of what goes forward this year versus what goes forward next year. So all these positions are important to us, but we have to make some hard choices. So in this case, this is us trying to combine the needs for communications, not just within our city corporate services, but also police services and fire services. Trying to find a happy medium, and then we continue to build up from there. So this is just a start.
Okay. And my other question, sorry, $200,000 for a new website. Is that real? Or was that an error? $200,000? Oof, I'm in the wrong business. And my last question, I'd like a little bit. So you're saying we can make all this work based on the recommendations with the projected deficit, with the surplus that's there that we can draw on, which will leave the 1 million. So once we draw on that surplus fund, that basically means, how are we going to replenish that fund in case there is?
Surplus.
Oh, we're going to be back in surplus, but only 1.3 million, right? No, we'll have 1.3 million left after we take out of our surplus fund that's 5 million, 5.7 million. Like, I just think if there's like another Fiona or there's another, like, is that going to be enough money left in our surplus fund?
No, no,
Okay.
no, he'll answer it, but that's, good question.
Yeah, I mean, thank you through the chair to Councillor McCabe. If we hit a Fiona, you know, I don't think we would plan for a Fiona. We certainly didn't when it hit. You know, a plan is your best estimate of what you're going to incur. Public Works has to deal with that with snow removal. You know, they got through, you know, pretty easy last year and didn't have a lot of expenses. You know, we hit a big storm and then we didn't see too much after that. Sydney was in a different scenario. But a financial plan, a budget is a plan, and it is your estimate. These are not the only funds that the city has access to. Fiona, we had access to a great deal of funding through the DFAP program that the province administers on behalf of the federal government. There can be other sources of revenue. We have the ability to borrow if we get into a pickle that we didn't anticipate. But we have a responsibility to our taxpayers to make our best estimate of what our expenditures will be to deliver the services that we believe are a priority, and to fund those through taxation and other revenue sources through the province. So it really represents our best guess. There is uncertainty with that because it is an estimate. I will discuss a little bit later in discussion on the capital budget. We have had a pattern of budgeting above and beyond what our actual expenditures come in at. So it's resulted in surpluses for the past few years. So I think the forecast budget, the forecast surplus for this fiscal year is another example of that. So we've tried to tighten the screws a little bit in terms of trying to get a better focus on what our expenditures are. But I do feel that our financial processes are still under construction in terms of being able to be really tight on it. So there's some cushion in there. There's a small contingency fund in financial and fiscal services. You know, we might see a fair bit of volatility in our borrowing requirements depending on what our capital budget approval is and what contracts actually get tendered versus what we approve. So there is volatility, and these are not certain numbers, but they are department staff and senior leadership's best estimate of what we'll encounter.
Sorry, my last follow-up to that. So you're confident and you feel good with where this is?
In as much as I can be in 7 weeks of exposure to the inner workings. The finance team has worked hard. The budget process has been, quite comprehensive. I think the CAO has done an excellent job in terms of soliciting input and creating a transparent and open process, consulting with council, aligning with strategic priorities and objectives. And I think the process is much improved from what I have seen from the outside looking in over past years. So I think we're in good stead. Do I have did I not have some anxious moments over the last few weeks trying to get to this point? I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But we'll continue to improve on that as we get some consistency in staffing. We've had a lot of turnover. There's been a lot of uncertainty, in the community with weather events and supply chain issues and tendering and procurement challenges. So lots of uncertainty, but I think this is we worked hard to come up with our best estimate. So yeah.
Thank you, Dan.
Councillor Drown.
Thank you, John, and thank you for your report and this draft budget. I know it's a start, and we just have this today to look at. I have 2 or 3 questions, and we can certainly move on. The Housing Accelerator funding, there's a lot of fanfare, and people get excited. My concern here is with the planning and heritage. I have developers, people that are calling me saying, we put an application in 6, 8, 10 months ago, a year ago. It's not coming up. We can't get anybody to call us back. It's costing us money. We lost builders. And yet I'd only see, what do we have here? A building inspector contract 1, and a GIS specialist. I know this would help, but the problem is with developers, is if they can't get a permit, they can't build. And the accelerator fund, I know, is sending money down here for us to get the building going. As the mayor has said, the only way we get a tax base is through our building permits, which is, new buildings, and then we get percentage of tax back. So what I'm asking is, can we access more on the Housing Accelerator Fund to get more people in place to get these permits out, to get a bigger tax base? That's what I'm asking. With 2 new positions, they're very specialized, but how is that helping developers, get their permit to get them to work? Can we access more of the Housing Accelerator funding in this upcoming budget?
Take that as the first question, Councillor
That'll
Drown,
be
and
the
then
first
we'll go with your next one. Yep.
That'd be great.
Go ahead, Dan.
If Dan could answer that?
I'm sure that the CAO and the Director of Integrated Services and Growth would like to comment on further, but there are actually 6 initiatives in the new initiatives that would be related to accelerating housing and permitting. The fire inspector would give the ability to do the fire review of building plans and sprinkler requirements, those types of things. The 121,000 for the planning and permitting GIS-centric technology is an IT-based solution that would support the permitting process, and also the public works initiatives in terms of the civil technician and the municipal engineer would also be supportive in that. And further, the new position that Michael Roos has just filled. He has great experience in terms of leading planning, and will be a great asset for the city in terms of redesigning processes and helping to assist address those concerns that you've highlighted. So that's my response, but I'll
No, that makes it a little clear. It's just, people need to be called back. They want updates. Business for developers costs money. If they can't get an answer, if they can't know where their building permit is application, like I said, they lose builders, they lose product. It's got to be a better, in my opinion, it has to be a better, quicker system. People say to me, I'm not doing this anymore, I'm going somewhere else. Well, we're working on it, we're trying. I guess I can come back and say, today in this budget, it looks like, things are going to speed up. So I just need something in the works to be able to get back to people and tell them where their application is. Because at the end of the day, that's how the city operates. We want to build apartments, we want to build houses, get a better tax break, keep the whole machine going. So that's great, and I accept that explanation. That's very good. Thank you. The other 2 questions I have, just to be quick, is the retention and the police. Do we not have to deal with union contracts in that case? Like, I guess it's, if we hire someone, you want to hire first class and then there's people in the system. Does this amount of money get everybody on the same playing field? And other people are not going to, like, if I started at my job, I started at a low class and then you get your experience after 2 years and you get bumped up. So is this money going to cover that for the new hires and the existing people that are there? And then the union contract issue.
Through the chair, if I could actually interject. So I want to go back to that first question really quick. So the planning department almost collapsed last summer, and this council approved a restructuring of this planning department. So to be realistic, we were actually in the last month clearing out the backlog of what happened over last year. And that's all new staff coming in with a very steep learning curve. So I just want to give kudos to this group for coming in and picking up what needed to be done in this department. When it comes to the Housing Accelerator Fund, yes, there'll be e-permitting, so developers will be able to see live where they are in the process. And the other key aspect that's going to happen through the Housing Accelerator Fund is, one, the finishing of the official plan, which will modernize what can actually go forward with the city in terms of density. And the other piece that keeps tripping us up all over the place is the zoning and development bylaw, which outlines incredibly inefficient processes. So that Housing Accelerator Fund money will be used to analyze the processes and trim them down so it can be more efficient for developers to move forward. So an improvement to processes, bringing in better technology so we can see where we are in the process. But I do want to give kudos to that planning team. It was just mentioned earlier on in the meeting, we have thousands of units coming online right now, going to a public meeting right now. So I just wanted to clarify that. In terms of police and the union, yes, definitely, we have to work with the unions in terms of what this retention funding will be. So there'll be conversations with the union to make sure that we're ticking all the boxes. What this came down to is essentially council had approved 6 new positions, but if we hire 6 new positions and then we have the threat of losing 12 positions, then it's a sum of losses pretty much. So that's why we're looking at this to make sure that salaries are balanced and that we can get the people in that we need and we can retain who we have. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm good.
Thank you. And just jump in here myself, just to be clear, so I understand, on the new initiatives and talking about, as Councillor Drown was saying, and the planning and permitting GIS centric, that's the piece, for example, that makes our planning application going to be kind of an e-version. Is that right? Is that
Thank you, through the chair. So what it's called in this list is the, I'm just trying to find it now.
planning and permitting GIS-centric technology?
That's, well, they have GIS-centric technology. Where's our customer service? Where's Rory's one on here, the IT one? Agenda, oh, so you've combined it all together, Dan? Is that what you've done? Planning and permitting GIS-centric? Is it all the same thing? Yes. Okay, so previously we had spoken to council about a customer service platform. That customer service platform is the same as the e-permitting platform and GIS. It's all tied together because it's backed by Esri, which is the GIS technology that backs all of these kind of systems. So what's being put forward here with the Housing Accelerator funding is actually a comprehensive system for the municipality that addresses customer service, addresses e-permitting, and logging issues that need to be addressed in public works. This system handles all of that.
So again, just clarify, I was making notes as I went along here, HAF funding, and so, but I don't have that HAF funding beside this planning and permitting GIS. Does it qualify for HAF funding? The 121,000?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, it does.
Great, thank you. And that's why, yeah, and it's just in there as a one-off, I do believe. Right. Anyone else?
Yeah, I have more.
Councilor McCabe?
Thank you. sorry, and I need to be able to understand, so I ask a lot of questions, and some of them are going to be repeat. One of them's going back to this communications role for the police. So I'm understanding, and I appreciate that all of these initiatives are important, and hopefully eventually we'll get to all of them. But can you tell me how you determined, from what I understand, this role, they'll work out of the police station, but they'll do some city work as well. Is that correct? Just before I ask the second part of that.
Through the chair to Councillor McCabe. They'll be housed in police, but they will also be communicating with City Hall in terms of the communications here. Part of there's a couple challenges here. It's difficult for communications in City Hall to be able to have a continuous flow of information with police and fire because there's no one specifically for communication over there. Like we have the chief, but the chief isn't always available for what's going on. And then if we had someone who's actually housed over there, it allows them to communicate when issues are happening to communications at City Hall. So we just have a better flow of information.
Will the priorities be, I'm cutting him off, I'm sorry. Will the priority be for that person to be the communications for the emergency services, whether it's fire? That will be their top priority, and then if there's extra time and they're not busy reporting, they'll help with offsetting what we do here? Is that kind of the plan?
Sure. So their role is emergency services, so reporting on issues that are happening. But there are a lot of things under emergency services that we're not quite doing right now. Education campaigns for both fire and for police, or education campaigns on emergency measures organization. What's a warming center versus a reception center? Those kind of things that are going out through social media. That would be the role of this communications person. If they had spare time, of course. I mean, our comms over here would.
So really, we're looking at doing the community media liaison for police, and if there's extra opportunity to communicate with, but they'll be called a communications officer instead of that term.
I think before council on Monday, we just have to streamline exactly what their title is going to be, but that's what the role is essentially going to be.
Yeah, that would help, because I think it gets confusing, like if we're looking at really, because I really think that role, and last year I was like, communications officer, but that role is a really vital role in that area because of everything we are dealing with in our city with public safety, and I think it would reduce a lot of, it would clear up communication in that whole area that we're dealing with, which could reduce some of the anxiety and stuff that we face in our city. That's just my own thought. How much do we spend on legal consultation with our city? How much will we save by hiring our own solicitor? Do you have that information?
We are at approximately $500,000 a year that we spend on legal.
And there'll probably be still times we'll have to consult
Okay, so
out.
we'll be clear, we still need a legal firm on
Yes.
contract. They would be involved in union negotiations and things like that. But having in-house, part of our challenge is folks are so busy at the municipality, like we have legal reminding us of things that need to be picked up and worked on. So that's that reference to project management. So if we actually had an in-house lawyer, they can handle some of these on-the-spot requests for legal opinions, or all these, sometimes during the day, it happens almost every day, there's different things that arise in a municipality where you think, oh, I really would feel more comfortable if I had a legal perspective on this. So instead of being billed so much an hour to get that, we have someone in-house that we can run things through. So at this point, we think the salary, we might come out to about the same, but we'll have to see over the first year, but it shouldn't be more than $500,000.
And that those consultative costs are in here somewhere, where you'll still go out to your outside legal.
It should still be an operational, yes.
Okay. I know, they're probably simple questions, but I'm
No,
just
it's
trying to
okay.
comprehend. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Mayor Brown?
you want to send me a text?
No, I'm just working my calculator. You have one too, I think, don't
do.
you? Top of your desk there.
Text,
Go ahead.
Texas Instruments, Texas Instruments. Danny, when I look at your first sheet, correct me if I'm wrong, so actual for 2022, 2023 for water and sewer surplus was 1.1 million, right? But if I go to the audited statements MRSB gave to us, they have it at 872,000. Is that a fair, is that a comparison that I can use? That 2022, 2023, because their audit statements go up until the end of March 31st, 2023, but it says surplus 872,525, but you have 1.1. Can you guys explain that? Is that because of capital or?
There would be, so the surplus is an operating surplus. So there are typically some adjustments that hit the financial statements below that line. Municipal capital expenditure grant in some cases, pension adjustments, and some extraordinary items I believe have in the past hit down there. There do typically end up being some adjustments to the financial statements, the consolidated, if you look at the consolidated
Yeah, I'm
financial
looking
statements.
at that too.
Yeah, where some departmental transactions get eliminated. So on our consolidated statement, although the fire department pays a service fee to the water and sewer utility, that gets eliminated on the consolidated statement. So there are some adjustments, so there will be, it won't be completely aligned.
No, but in this, in your first spreadsheet, water and sewer annual operations, so it's not consolidated with other operations like your city operation, it's a standalone, it's at 1.1. The actual was, 1.1.
Yeah, so, and
That
if
was
you-
for 22, 23, sorry. I'm 23, 24, so instead of 800, it's 1.1 million. If I look at your first column, 2022, 2023 actual, so that would correlate with the audit statements, correct? Because it goes to March 31st, am I right?
Not necessarily, no.
Oh, so the audited statements don't go to the March 31st, 2023?
No, it would correlate in terms of time frame, but it may not align completely with the operating budget.
So then if I go over to your third column, this is what you're forecasting. 23, 24, 1.4
Surplus.
million. And I think the chair of the Standing Committee for Water and Wastewater, I think I asked at our last committee meeting, Mr. Chair, did I not say, would the forecast be about 500,000? And he said, yeah. So you get 1.4 million, okay. So let's go back up to city operating. So 22, 2023, it was 5.8 million, right? But then I go back to the consolidated statements, and it says 3.7 million.
Again, there are some differences in terms of the budgeting amount. So the auditors would typically do an adjustment from the internally generated operating budget, and they reconcile to what would be consistent with public sector accounting
Okay.
standards. So there are some differences there.
Okay.
I will say that the forecast numbers
Yeah.
have been revised to some extent by finance staff and projected on basis that they felt were reasonable, projecting salaries incurred to date based on factors and so on. So the department heads have been included in those deliberations. So I can't account right now for the difference between the manager's suggestion of a $500,000 surplus versus what we're forecasting at
1.4.
At 1.4, but
Yeah.
it may be part of the estimating work that goes on within finance to project out what were November numbers to try to get us to year end.
So, Mr. Chair, if I can just carry on with this. So at our last meeting of Water, Standing Committee for Water and Wastewater, we agreed to raise the rates by 3%. So is that 3% in this projection for the budget, 24, 25? Is that 15,621,000, that includes the 3%?
Through the mayor to, through the chair to the mayor,
Okay.
yes, it
Yeah,
does.
it's, okay, like, I don't know if the chair had some concerns about it, but I did endorse it because I thought it was at 500,000. Then I look at the statements from our audited statements 22, 23, and it showed that we had 800,000 as surplus, but we have 1.1. Like, we can't be going to the public and saying, uh-oh, we have to raise the rates. Can I just finish? I know you want to get in there, Mr. Chair, because I know you had some issues with it. But now, for 24, 25, we're going to budget a $245,000 deficit for water and wastewater. And last year, we budgeted 488,000, but the forecast looks like we're going to be at let's round it up, 1.5 million. So again, these numbers are very important, and I think I go back to our CAO that, surpluses, I love this line, surpluses, it's not real money. But if it's a deficit, it's real money, so we have to pay it down. So surplus deficits, it's all real money. And in the past, we've taken that surplus and paid it down on our long-term debt. And I think you know, Danny, that if you look at our audited statements, I know Betty would know this, our budgeted net debt for 2023 is 185 million. Is that correct or is that wrong? And remember, we have to, I think and Danny, you know this better than anyone, we're only allowed to borrow up to 12% of our gross
10, yeah.
assessed value, correct? Both on residential and non-residential. So, the business community or, residents are going to be saying, that's a big debt. And again, the CAO said, maybe in her past life in Beaumont, is that, or maybe with Betty too, in St. Thomas, is that, extra, any financial surplus was directed to the debt or to the debt. So on that, if I look at fiscal services, where is fiscal services in your operating expenses? Where is that, Danny? Is that under
That's
finance?
under finance, audit, and fiscal services.
So last year for fiscal services, this is paying down in our debt, correct, Betty? We budgeted 9.1 million. This is for 22, 23, but we paid 8.4. This year, we budgeted 23, 24, 10.2 million. Now, in the past, when we did budgets, we'd get the actuals, like the forecasted from the for the year that we're going through. Did we pay 10 million this year? Do we know that? That's why I like the financial statements, those monthly financial statements, because you know what? It all comes down to the money, and we got a debt, we got to pay it down. So can I find out, maybe by Monday, what we pay down, and what are we forecasting? Because I can't tell, this is a great, Danny, I appreciate how you laid this out, but it doesn't fill some of the holes or questions I have. So I'd like to find out what was the actual for the debt we paid on, and what are we forecasting for this year? And then, Danny, if I look at under arts and culture, which would be Wayne Lawn's budget, and I go to 16.4 from the 23-24 budget. Confederation Center of the Arts, 280,000. Confederation Center of the Arts, 50,000. Arts Guild library support, 492,000. So for this year, that's for 23-24. Where is that in the budget, or are we going to have that? Is that in the budget? Because that's why I'm asking these questions. Is it under economic development, which I see that's not this 280,000. That's the new ask for the renovations. Where's that? Where do you have those? And do we have them in this year?
Yes, we through the chair to your worship. There are grants in a number of different places in the budget. So there are some within fiscal, finance and fiscal. There are some in economic development. There are some in planning and heritage, the heritage grants. Incentives. So they're smattered throughout, but there are amounts budgeted for grants for the coming year.
Yeah, I know that, I believe it's under Wayne Long's budget, under economic development. There's the affordable housing tax incentive. There's the tax incentive we have for businesses that create or build on existing infrastructures. So that would be in here too. I'd like to find out what that is. So then I go down to other, which is 21-1 of last year's budget, Airport Authority, Cary, Civic Center. And you know, for that $3 million that we put out for grants, $2.4 million goes to those 4 areas. 2.4. Then when I go down, and they are agreements we've signed on to, so we have to respect those agreements. But then grants, Seniors Active Living Center, Sport PEI, Bedford McDonald House, it's there too, Charlottetown Yacht Club, and so forth. And they amount to, well, we have under new grants. Where do those grants fall under? Like, are we respecting those grants this year, or have you dropped some? Have you modified some? Can I find out about that too? Maybe not tonight, but for the meeting on Monday, because I'll just keep these tagged as questions I'll have on Monday night. And the process this year, as Councillor Duran remembers, the deputy and Councillor McKay, last year it was a closed meeting. We had budget discussions in closed meetings. This year we got live stream with a prepared budget, which was put together by senior management. But I think your meetings are held as departmental meetings. Our meetings are out in the open. That's why, you know, questions I'm asking, I know that Councillor Duran, Councillor McKay, other councillors will get questions, you know, what's going on? What are you doing? Because anything we talk about, it's live stream and it's archived, so anyone can pick it up. So my last question, I appreciate this, your Mr. Chair, but when it comes to police, so I've tried to figure this out, and I've talked to the chief quite a bit, and we did hire 6, right, by a resolution. That's for 23-24 budget, right? Okay, but carrying forward, that 6 would be what? 800,000? Am I too high there, Steve, for 6?
I think you're close.
Yeah. So 6, and then we have some contract that are not on salary, but they're on with government of Prince Edward Island. 6 that are at the Provincial Community Outreach Center. Now, this is combined. There's 6 contract through the province, 6 with the Provincial Community Outreach, Wellness Center, the Community Emergency Shelter, and then we have 2 for mental health. We have 1 for forensic, and then there's 1 for integrated services. That's 10 positions. Their contract. So at the end of 12 months, you know, do we keep them or do we let them go? So, look, I know the KBMG outlines how we have to go forward, how we need to hire more police officers, and we all agreed, right? Public security is priority number 1 for the city of Charlottetown. We're adhering to that with adding 6 new officers. But, like, how much can we absorb in terms of fiscally being responsible? And that's why I keep saying, Danny, what we're getting from the province is not keeping up with what the police services, fire services, every other service that we offer as essential services for this city. We're not able to keep up unless we raise taxes. And that's not the way to solve it. We cannot just raise taxes to say that'll be the solution to our woes, financial woes. We have to find ways to be, you know, carry this out. We're in our second year of a 4-year mandate. I'm a firm believer of incremental progression, additions, augmentation of our services. I'm fully supportive of all services. So I just want to, be careful how quick we go. And as we were told, I think, Madam, the deputy was there at our standing committee for protective and emergency services. Fire services have come to a conclusion to the arbitration. So how does that affect it? That's incorporated in this budget, but is it still a moving target? Because is it 12 hours? Is it 24 hours? So a lot of questions here. And Danny, again, and senior management, I appreciate the work that you put into this, but it's always that the devil's is in the details. Boo. Thanks. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Brown. Councilor Drown.
Thank you. This is just going to be quick. I just want to address the mayor's recommendation by the Water and Sewer Committee to go to council. It was just at the end of our meeting, we came in with a $500,000 surplus. So the recommendation to go to council would be debated at council. It's just a recommendation, right? So as chair, we took the vote, we recommended, it goes to council in their budget time, and we discuss it there. We're not saying we're going to raise it. It's just open for discussion. So without everybody going tomorrow, now you're going to raise, it's going to go for discussion. It's only a recommending body or committee to be discussed when we get to council. So I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, I appreciate that, but I was just going back to the numbers that we were given. And you were chairing the meeting, and when I started looking through what Danny presented tonight before we started the meeting and what's in our audited statements, I said, okay, the numbers don't match. So it's a recommendation. I understand that, and clearly it's not going to be passed tonight. It's going to council. But that was the clarification I wanted to make because you were chairing the meeting. Thank you, sir.
Betty, Manager Betty French, go ahead.
If I could just clarify the difference between the water and sewer audited financial statements and what's been presented tonight. The 872,000, if you go down a few more lines, the municipal capital expenditure grant of 229,000, add those two together, and you get your 1.1 million.
Yeah, that's how we get it. But that's capital, right? No, the 200?
No, that's operating. The MCEG grant is operating.
And what page is that?
If you look at the same operation statement where you got your 872,
Yeah. Go down to municipal grant expenditure?
yes,
229?
municipal capital expenditure grant, 229,000.
Yeah. So,
Those two numbers added together give you your 1.1 million.
but I wouldn't know that. I'm just looking at operating surplus, and if I was a layperson looking at these numbers, that's what I'd get. Just remember, the municipal capital expenditure grant is what we spend, and then we get the 10% back, correct?
No, the municipal capital expenditure grant is what we get back.
But not based on what we purchased for infrastructure?
It is
Yeah.
based on, yes.
Yeah.
But that's the amount that we get.
That clarification.
Thank you, Danny, for that, and Betty, and the questions. So that's a pretty good first pass at the operating budget and the new initiatives. Do you want to? Can we migrate to the capital and just for some comments and an overview? Dan, you're still on.
Thank you, Chair. So if we head to page 4 of the handout, you'll come upon a capital budget document, which is an initial draft, not one which has been scrutinized by the senior leadership team in terms of establishing priorities. It's not a document that we're comfortable with moving forward at this point to council for approval. This is very much a first draft. I want to point out I want to show you a graph that I put on the screen, but it's on the page after your capital budget. And it shows the trend over the past 5 or 6 years in terms of the capital budget and what's been approved by council. In 1920, it was 14.6 million. 2021, it was 26 million. And this is net of partner financing, so things like ICIP and CCBF, gas tax, et cetera. 21-22 was almost 50 million. 22-23, 64 million. 23-24, 65 million. And this most recent initial draft is at 91 million. If you look at the actual spend over that same time period, the period from 2019-20 to 22-23, we have actual numbers for. You'll see that in 2019-20, we spent just a little more than we budgeted for. In 2021, we spent quite a bit less than we budgeted for, about $8 million. In 21-22, we spent a lot less than we budgeted for, almost $31 million. In 22-23, we spent quite a bit less, $23.5 million from what we budgeted. So the graph kind of highlights what I consider to be a developing capital budget trend gap between what we're budgeting for and what we're actually procuring and purchasing. So I think part of that is process in terms of how the budget document has been compiled, but I also think it's based on a desire by department heads to address concerns that have been brought by council about one thing or another that might be considered a priority by that individual, but maybe not a collective priority for all of council. And some things may have come to the capital budget that perhaps weren't as well thought out. The process, some of the process challenges, I think, is there's been a habit of carrying forward from a previous year, a capital budget that was approved, but the money wasn't spent. So rather than looking today at what we plan to spend for the next 12 months and beyond, there's consideration given to what might have been approved before, even though it's a project or some purchases that we may not consider a priority anymore. So there's kind of a cumulative buildup of untendered projects, if you will, that may or may not still have high priority. So I think we have to go back in our budgeting process, particularly on tangible capital assets, because this ask of $91 million for capital projects net of partner funding is just not something that the city corporation can pull off. We don't have that capacity, and so part of it is process, but also part of it is prioritizing major projects and growth, making sure that the growth is well planned in terms of partnering with other infrastructure, funding available, making sure that the spending is consistent with the strategic plan and the strategic priorities that have been identified. So not to say that there are specific projects in this $90 million ask that aren't worthy. They're probably all good projects, but we have to make some hard decisions in terms of what, with the current fiscal climate and the appetite for increased taxation or lack thereof, what we can afford to do. So where I would feel comfortable with this capital budget moving into the new fiscal year would be, closer to the order of magnitude of about $30 or $35 million net of capital funding. I don't know if we can get there, but I think we need to do some hard work in terms of where we're going to encumber the city in terms of long-term debt and interest charges, and really take a long, hard look at each of those spending priorities. So I bring this only to your attention at this stage because, as I say, senior leadership hasn't done a second pass with department heads to really ascertain if those carry forward amounts are real or not, and perhaps a further examination or deeper dive in terms of what are the real priorities and what can we do without for a little bit, and what are kind of nice to haves and what are need to haves. So I wanted to provide this to you because we wanted to get it to committee before we go to council. But I think between now and the council meeting on Monday, we're going to have to do some more additional work on this to try to narrow the focus. That may not be enough time for us to clarify what the spending priorities are going to be. We may need to extend this capital budget further and ask for an extension from the province in terms of approving this spending plan. There may be portions of it that we can parse out and say, for specific projects and spending, we know that we've approved that project before. We've got funding committed, we can go ahead and approve that. But we need to go carefully because there is an assumption that as soon as we approve a capital budget, that expenditure is approved, and we can't afford $90 million this year. So we have to make some choices, in my opinion.
Thank you, Dan. And yeah, just on your graph, that gap. I think you kind of referenced, or one of your points is there's a big part of a carry forward that's a part of that gap. And Councillor Drown?
Thank you, John. I appreciate that, Danny, and because I couldn't understand how we could approve so many projects without the hope of getting them all completed in 1 year. We've done that consistently over the last few years with saying that we can complete them, and then at the end of the year, well, we couldn't. So it'd be a carryover and start again. So we're finally getting to a point here that we can't afford everything that we're doing. So let's just take a look at it, have some financial background into what we can afford and what we can't afford. This is a breath of fresh air because the ceiling keeps going up and up and up, as your numbers say. So this is a welcome news for me that we're just taking a hold on it, sober second thought, what we're going to do, and proceed down the road. And like I said, thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Drown. CAO Elner.
Thank you, through the chair. The other piece that I want to highlight here is the real need for discussions over prioritization in terms of expectations. So when you look at that big matrix, there's a list of everything that's going on right now in this municipality, and then there's a list of all the things that we need to do. And at some point, we have to come to a point of, hey, we can do these top 10 things really well, or we can try and do 300 things not so great. So we need to have that conversation about what the prioritization is and recognize the size of our workforce and what we can actually accomplish and be realistic with this. So that's what part of this capital conversation is as well. And just being realistic in what we can actually accomplish each year for the municipality.
And I know he stepped out there, but CAO Elner, maybe you could answer. Just that I understand Dan in his remarks to say that there's a possibility that we may have to extend our budget date.
Beyond. I thank you, through the chair.
No,
You can ask for special permission, but that being said, we're going to try and do what we can to get
Yeah,
this.
but that's what he did.
Yeah,
That's what he did say.
He did just say that. So in addition to that, we're going to try and do what we can to get it across the finish line. So there may be, as always happens at budget time, special meetings being set up in order to pull committee into as well as council.
Yeah.
And I think Danny's just coming back. If we can get it across the finish line before the 31st, we will. But what Dan's just trying to flag for you is kind of manage expectations just in case we can't get there. Here's what we can.
So at a high level, just going back to your graph here, Dan, which I think has been great context, and as Councillor Drown has said, breath of fresh air to try to get, I guess, to some current reality. If on the reset kind of going forward, that gap in the graph would kind of disappear, and we'd only be projecting in budgets for a capital window of a fiscal year, say what we really think we can get done, and not shooting for the stars, I guess. Is that kind of the purpose in trying to, on the reset?
Yes, Chair, like I kind of explained to Councillor McCabe, the intention of the financial plan, the budgets, and the operating and the capital budgets is to make our best estimate. And it's not about, we want to perhaps plan for some uncertainty, but we don't want to, it's not a Christmas list that we know Santa Claus can't fill. So we have to be realistic in terms of what we can accomplish and also realistic in terms of what we can afford.
Thank you. Mayor Brown?
So this has been an issue when I was on council back in 2006, issue right from 2018. I think it's similar to other municipalities, maybe not as dramatic, but we only pay what we borrow. So we're not going to borrow $90 million to have that money ready for projects. We borrow when the project goes to RFP and then go to tender, and then we decide in a tender. That's when you start borrowing the money. So you shouldn't think that 91 million is already borrowed. It's projected to be borrowed if we have to. And what we'll find out with, let's say we go 30 million, we won't finish it either, because we just can't keep up with some of the realities of shortage of labor, supply line problems. It's a fact of life, especially since post COVID-19. Yeah, it'll be interesting how we do decide what projects will get there, but we do have Bell Alliance Centre that borrow from our capital budget. We do have Eastlink Centre that borrows from our budget, so keep that in mind. And I think that, the Confederation Centre is saying that they could look at a project that would offset that 5 million ask through a capital project, because the asset in the end, Danny, will be our asset. So that's another consideration we have to keep in mind. But yeah, look, it's always good to look at new ways of doing business. Thank you.
Councillor McCabe?
Thank you, Chair. That mindset overwhelms me a little bit, Your Worship, in the sense of keeping it real. We'll project it and it'll get done sometime. I think we have to be a little bit more realistic when we're talking about that. Once we approve this in budget, it might be 4 years' time and stuff, but it's been approved, then it comes back, they start the process, and the money's already approved. I think it's more realistic to go and look and see it. What are we going to be able to do? Where are we planning to go? I appreciate what you're saying. I just think that that's a little bit risque in the sense of, if we're approving something and we don't get to it for 4 years, then really are we approving it?
So are you asking to keep with the 90 million or just to
No,
go
I'm asking to keep it to realistic. So if we look at this graph, we're seeing that we've approved projects over the last number of years that have already been approved. So when they decide they're ready to start that money's already been approved somewhere, right? So I think it's just to kind of more organize it so that for people that maybe don't have that grandiose way to look at something, it's more attainable, more real in front of me, so that for me personally, or for people that want to see exactly what are we approving, how much money's going out, and what are we realistically going to get done, rather than in 5 years we're approving this big project, but we're not going to start it. It's like the developing that we do with these planners. We approve their land and they don't build for 20 years, but it's already been approved.
But that's what's been happening.
I know,
We've been
but I'm saying I
approving
think
these
we need to
budgets.
stop that.
And if you stop it, we still won't be meeting that orange line. It'll be going below it, because.
But I'm hearing them say they're going to go back and look at if there's been money approved a while ago and it's now really not on the books anymore, it's not important, they're going to come back, you're going to try and tighten this up a little bit. Is that not what I just heard? That's what I just heard. So I think that's what's really important for all of us, is that maybe we go back and we look. We now have a strategic plan. We now have things that we didn't have placed before that we have to be able to tie these projects to, and where are we at and what's really going to happen?
Yeah, it'll be interesting to have this conversation with capital budgets, because everybody wants a capital budget on the list. But could I also say, we do have a March 31st deadline. We've met it every year in the past, meeting after meeting, so I'm asking just to stay online with getting that done so we can get it passed before the 31st of March. Thank you.
Just try to ask this question, to you, Dan, is what pressure, how much pressure is there on potentially, and I know you're not done yet, capital budget, there's a lot to chew through in a short time. What pressure, how much pressure potentially is there on the tax rate?
I'm sorry, Chair, on the which,
Tax rate?
on the tax rate? Well, currently with the operating budget, we're within our envelope, within our tax envelope, so no pressure from the operating budget. If we were to entertain a $90 million capital budget and actually spend that money this year, there would be pressure on the tax rate. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there any more questions of Dan or CAO or Betty and the team? And
No, Mr. Chair, we
Just
do.
want to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chair,
Pardon me?
we
Yeah.
we do have to
Mayor Brown?
take our, look at this budget thoroughly at the next meeting, which we will on Monday, the 4th. And you'll have a revised capital budget pared down to,
Operating will be on Monday.
oh, I thought we were doing both. I thought,
We'll have to, that's. Thank you, through the chair, that's what the director is saying, that we need a little bit more time to work through capital.
Yeah.
So Monday night will be operating, and I think what we'll have to do is set a special meeting for council as soon as we're ready. Or first this committee for capital, and then for council. But as soon as we book this committee for capital, we're also going to book council to have enough time
Yeah.
for it to go through.
yeah, both budgets will be coming down at the same time before the 31st. That's because in the past, we did capital first, then operational. Now we're doing both, correct?
That would be the intention, certainly, to
Okay.
get everything wrapped up by March 31st. I do think it's important that the capital budget is reflective of our best estimate in terms of what we're going to accomplish in the year and what the priorities are and what we're prepared to fund. So I think if I were given the choice in terms of a recommendation, if we didn't have a clear picture of what our capital priorities were and if we were able to afford them, I would recommend that we ask for an extension on the capital budget till we had a real number. If we had specific projects that we needed we knew we were going to proceed with, we could approve that budget and then come back later to revise a budget based on some of the other items that were being considered. But the intention would be to get this all wrapped up before March 31st, but
So-
we need to do it.
Danny, the 91 million that we forecasted last year for the capital budget, did we amortize that in the fiscal services budget? No. Like, the budget for capital, I don't think was ever amortized or put in the budget document that we passed last year or years previous. It was go as we spend, and then go as we borrow and spend. So are you trying to forecast what we're going to borrow and then incorporate that into the operational budget as fiscal services, under fiscal services?
Absolutely, yes.
That's the first year we've done it. We've never done that before. No, but I'm just saying, it's the first year we've done that. So be prepared, instead of 90 million or 30 million, it may be lower. And is that a standard accounting practice? It is? That's required by all municipalities.
Your capital budget should reflect your best estimate at your spending, at your capital spending, what you're
And-
going to actually accomplish,
And what it's going to cost us to borrow.
and what it's going to cost you to borrow. There'd be depreciation associated with some assets that are put into use through the fiscal year, so that will have an impact on your
Well,
operational
we've never,
budget as
this will
well.
be the first year we're doing it. And this is a requirement under the MGA?
It's a PSAB requirement, so public sector accounting standards in terms of what you capitalize.
that changes.
It will affect your operating results and should be considered when you're doing your financial plan or your budget. Yes.
Well, you may, but then it's not going to be good for all of us. So we'll have to wait and see what it's going to cost, but I've never, so Summerside, they all do it.
I haven't looked at Summerside's specific practices, but I do know what, good accounting practices would be with respect to capital budgeting and operational budgeting resulting from decisions on capital budget.
Thank you.
Can I?
Thank-
I know, never mind.
Councillor McCabe?
Well, I just wanted to reflect the comment. I know people are wanting to go. When you say it's not going to be good, I don't understand why it's not good if that's what the real numbers are, and that's what, I don't understand. But we can talk about that next
Yeah,
meeting.
you can do that in the takeaway.
Chair, if I could,
Yeah,
to make it clear,
CAO.
when you're approving a budget, say you were approving a budget for $90 million for capital, you're approving to take on whatever debt we need to. So as part of your budget.
But we've never done it before.
Right, but this is philosophically, this is what you're doing. You're giving permission for us to take on that debt. And from an administrative point of view,
Yeah.
it would be irresponsible for us not to do the math to tell you
Okay.
how much the debt is going to cost this municipality
Yeah.
and put it into our operational expenses.
That's if you borrow the
this
30
is
million.
like, regardless of what other municipalities do,
Yeah.
this is standard accounting practices being put into place here. So I just really want to emphasize that going in. This is what we're held to. You know, we really, this is, from my perspective as the CAO, this is the responsible thing
So
to
just
do from our
borrowing
side.
cost for 30 million, 60 million, could be 6 million, could be. So then that has to be accounted into, so we have to reduce services or raise taxes. Well, look at the numbers. If we went with everything that we have here, no to reserve, we have your first sheet, you looked at it, right? It says $1.3 million debt. If we keep everything as is with all these positions and everything else. So this doesn't add the borrowing costs for 30 million, $60 million. That could be another 6 or 12 million. So instead of 1.3 million debt, it's 12 million debt. So where do you get that? We've never done it before, that's what I'm saying. For 6 years I was on council, and this is my 5th year in council in the office of the mayor. It was always not accounted for because we paid the debt or we accounted the debt when we borrowed the money.
And we always stand up and say, yay, we have a 15 million surplus budget, which isn't real either. So I think we need to find a way then to figure out how we have to do it legit.
But that's my explanation. That was my explanation of adding to the debt. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you with that. We'll close with that unless, Councillor Drong, you good? Okay. Number 7 then on the agenda, introduction of new business. Is there anything on new business? No, the only comment I want to make on that, on new business is the mayor referenced, and then again, this, a budget impact thing, with fire, at the, police and fire committee thing, the fire chief indicated that the arbitration piece with the fire piece has been settled, so that's going to be no numbers around that, but suffice to say that that's going to put again more pressure on our operating and capital budget kind of going forward. So again, which circles back to the revenue formula with the province. Why we? Dan?
Just in response to that, I can confirm that the budget with the new initiative of the 2 supervisors being recommended, to the best of our estimation at this point, the budget that you've been presented with will accommodate the arbitration decision and the go-forward plan in terms of providing staffing for the fire hall.
Which includes the firemen as well, is it? Okay, all right, great. No, thank you for that. All right, motion to adjourn. Councillor McCabe, Second, Councillor Drong, thank you. Thank you. Meeting's over.